the medical machine will suck you in, stuff you with statins, and won't tell you anything useful about nutrition or root cause. So that could be a problem. Like high blood pressure, you're 2 times more likely to have a heart attack. High cholesterol, it doesn't make any difference actually. High insulin, 5 or 6 times. But a high calcium score, if you do nothing, you could be 20 times more likely to have a heart attack. That's how powerful it is.
You're listening to the Family Health Lab. Healthy parents, healthy kids.
Hello, Ivor. Welcome to Family Health Lab. Long time no see.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Claire. Great to be here.
I think the last time we saw each other was at a camp trip, and you, from what I remember, it was in the north of England at a interesting nutrition event, and you are quite the organised camper. Do you still go camping?
Not really, but I'm gearing up this year finally to get back to it. I only did it very briefly. I was starting at the time. I think it was Real Food Rocks in the UK. Yeah, it was great fun. But this year in the summer, we're hoping to begin to do a little bit. Go camp on the beach, remote beaches in Ireland, and then wake up to the surf. So that's the plan.
Oh, that sounds absolutely beautiful. Like the pristine beaches over there. You've got quite a unique background in terms of how you came to nutritional science. So biochemical engineer, and then you turned a health advocate, really getting very, very, very deep into the science, the research, the policy, and what's behind the decision making. How would you sum up your current role? I know that's probably quite a tricky question.
Yeah, it's kind of, things changed a little. You're probably aware in 2020. So I've been taking on the food industry, nutrition industry, big pharma, I guess, since 2012 when I started into metabolic health. Then 2020, it became apparent with my network in low carb. I mean, the top people, a lot of people kind of just thought it was a pandemic, but a lot of the top people and myself realized that this was kind of a challenge facing us. And in ways it was bigger than the prior cholesterol, statin and fat and carb one. So I very much started into that. I maintained my work on metabolic health because I still run metabolicduo.com, kind of subscriber service for all the metabolic stuff. And in fact, only on Saturday, we did a day-long conference with lunch on all of the metabolic health stuff in Ireland down south. But from 2020, I moved into kind of the COVID thing and then got into geopolitics, joined the Mavericks organization. I've traveled all over the world speaking on geopolitical kind of strategies of various power bases in the UN and elsewhere. So I branched out into a lot of things. So I juggle a lot now.
You certainly do. And we had a chat at the beginning. So the metabolic health, which is a great deal of my listeners, that's their primary interest. But I think there's plenty of links and crossovers with what you're diving into now. And you also still run groups and workshops, you were telling me, for those people who are very interested or would like support or would like to deep dive really, really far into the science and the background that's influencing what's happening in the world with the health and nutrition and lots of other things. But I just wanted to take you back to the beginning of your work, because as I said, you came across this from a totally different industry and a totally different angle. And in one of your Denver talks, and you've given some amazing, detailed, very, very science-backed talks in Denver, for example. One of those talks, you begin with talking about your father and his life and how his life was cut short with his heart problems. And I just wanted to get to that point to see if that was the catalyst, because it was quite the radical transformation of careers and of interest points. So was it your father's journey and early death that really got you started?
Well, it was certainly part of it, Claire, because really, in short, I was a corporate chemical engineer, biochemical, 30 years of management and team leadership in complex problem solving. So all branches of science. So that was my key art for decades. So when I got poor blood test results, 3 measures, ferritin and GGT and cholesterol was really high. I found out after going to 2 or 3 doctors trying to get answers on the implications of those measures and what the root causes would be. I went straight into professional mode, and the answers were so weak, I knew they didn't really know. And I couldn't believe for standard blood tests, they did not know their own core technology. And I said, there's something huge here to be discovered. So I just jumped in, back to the biochem. Within 2 weeks, I realized we'd been told utter nonsense on fat, carbohydrate, cholesterol, almost everything for the last half century. And then I did, in my mind, connect it to my father, because he had always tried to avoid fat and he ate the polyunsaturated spreads. And he was all focused on trying to stay healthy by avoiding fat. But he wasn't really focused on avoiding sweets or sugar, because that was kind of bad for your teeth. But the real focus, we all know, was for heart disease, which he had in the family. It's fat. So I realized he had walked to his doom. Basically, first heart attack in his early 60s, dementia, vascular dementia in later 60s. So he began to lose his mind. And I was with him when he died in the bed at 2 a.m. at 72. And it was just a really bad situation. So absolutely, that was part of it, because I was fueled by a righteous anger. But I was also fueled by, I had led teams of engineers for, like I said, decades. And here I was in my corporate with hundreds of engineers who would actually understand this quite readily if I put it together in a advanced technical presentation, which we did on our business. But I figured I can do one on this stuff. And I did. And I had packed out rooms in my corporate. It was a huge success. All the senior management loved it. People began to lose weight. They got more motivated, because when you lose weight and you go low carb, your whole physiology changes, of course, but your psychology changes, your neurobiochemistry change, everything changes for the better. So that's what launched me into that. But yeah, my father, but also I kind of an anger, to be honest, that hundreds of millions, if not billions of people are being guided into the worst possible nutritional advice. It just astonished me, yeah, as it does you, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's why some of us have gone with this, not only changed our own health, but then really, really want to push this information out into the world in our own way, or do some research or do some program or advocacy, support others, and some retrain as health coaches. And in your case, you became a researcher and a public health body person looking into all of the science, and a speaker and a podcaster and a content creator and a workshop deliverer, all of those good things. The talk that you delivered in 2019 at that event we mentioned earlier, Real Food Rocks, I really remember that. The only talk that I've ever seen where not only was the room packed, people were listening in the corridor, trying to hear what you were saying, and this information that was just so radical, and they were just desperate to hear, your updates, your information, and some insights in what they could do. This is a huge topic for people, but there were people climbing on things to look into the window, crowds of people. And that was very, very cool. I was like, wow, what's this rock star up to? This is amazing. And that's about heart health. Isn't that amazing? People on their own time, on a weekend, damp weekend in the countryside in England, desperately trying to seek answers that aren't being given to them by the bodies that they should be able to trust. So where did that bring you in terms of your own health then, in terms of those heart results that you'd had that had so concerned you?
Yeah, well, actually, I remember now, that was kind of embarrassing for me. Irish, we're not that humble, but it's kind of awkward. I gave the talk and it was fairly packed. And then they asked me coming up to lunch, could I give it again? Because people had heard about it. And I said, yeah, no problem. Because it's easy. I know it inside out. And I gave it again. And they came back in the afternoon and asked sheepishly, could you give it once more? So it was hilarious. I had to deliver it 3 times. It was extraordinary. But yeah, that was about heart health and coronary artery calcification. and basically around 10 minutes on the root causes, 10 minutes on the coronary calcium CT scan, which is the ultimate test for heart disease risk, and then broader guidance. So it was only a 30-minute talk. But me originally, I looked up the 3 blood measures I mentioned because the doctors didn't seem to have a clue, including a professor of medicine in the family who I brought in finally, and didn't get much from him either. I looked them up, and within like one evening, I found out how dangerous these markers were to have really high, like I had them. I mean, for heart disease, for cancer, for everything. And I realized, my God, this is risk. I'm an engineer, right? I'm a risk manager. This is massive risk. I mean, some diseases I had 5 times the risk because of my numbers, like 5, 6, 7 times. These are big risks, So with another couple of weeks of research, I just followed the metrics, went down through all the biochemistry, the published science, began to realize it was to do with carbohydrate and fat and carbohydrate metabolism, began to discover about vegetable oils, study cholesterol, and at the end I had the answer. I had to basically cut all the carbohydrates out. Maybe I can bring some back later, but right now it was kind of emergency station. All the carbohydrates pretty much cut out, and meat, fish and eggs mostly, and non-starchy, low-carb vegetables for the next while. And in 9 weeks, not only did I fix all the metrics, I optimized them. I lost, in kilograms, I lost around, 15 kilos? Yeah, around 15 kilograms in 9 weeks, or 35 pounds. And my blood pressure, which was hypertension, mild hypertension for years, they were trying to get me to take drugs. With no exercise, no other impact or no other input except diet change, my hypertension just dropped away to nothing. And I had a perfect 120/80 or a bit lower. So I realized then I'd stepped on a massive root cause of chronic disease. It was so big, it probably dwarfed any other root cause of chronic disease. I said, this is big. So I went out to let people know. And later, I did get a heart scan because a rich entrepreneur in Ireland found me around 2015 and started funding me to travel all around the world and speak. And he had a huge calcium score. That's how he discovered all this madness back in 2013. And I eventually got a calcium score. I think I was 48 years old, so it's around 8 years ago. And it was a 0. Which is fantastic to get. So in spite of me from the age of 20 to, I guess, around 40 odd, I had been very overweight and very unhealthy. Clearly, that's why my metrics had gotten so bad by 2012, 13. I got those terrible results. But in spite of that, luckily, I reversed it all. And I ended up many years later, as I say, at 48, getting a 0 score. Which is super. It doesn't mean that you sit back and relax, because you can always develop coronary calcification through many different things, mostly insulin resistance, of course, and vegetable oils, but you can also have an autoimmunity issue, which progresses disease. So you got to keep an eye on things, but a 0 is a great base to start from.
Incredible story, really, when you think about it. Not only some people do fix their own health, but that becoming such an advocate and then becoming so all over the research in every different aspect. But you've said there that you're really turning around those first health markers that you had within a matter of weeks. And we're talking heart disease is the biggest killer of people. There's billions being spent on research, looking for where's the causes of this. But you with that problem solving skill were able to really cut this down into the key issues. And as you said, looking into the causes and then assessing the risk and a particular test that you've mentioned, and then particular actions or guidance to take. So 3-pronged approach. You've mentioned that test, the coronary calcification score test. You were an early pioneer, along with the charity that I believe you were part of, or that your philanthropist began in Ireland. So really, really, really early doors. People had not heard of this. So you were really instrumental in getting this as far as it's come, and it has definitely become more aware. It's not as accessible as we'd possibly like, but it's so much better. Could you tell us a bit more about that test and what it's looking for, and how important it is?
Yeah, so it's no, thanks, Claire. It's the coronary calcium CT scan of the heart, which gives the CAC score. So if you Google some of those things, you'll hit it. An important distinction is it's not an invasive coronary angiogram, and it's not a CT scan with injected dye. So they can inject dye into your arteries and do this scan and get more information and visualize more. But to be honest, to screen or just to check if you've got high risk, you just need the simple old-fashioned low radiation CT scan to get just a CAC score, and later if you have work to do, you may go further. But the key message is just a simple scan, 5 minutes, you get your score from 0 to thousands. And it's the amount of calcium in your arteries. So really put quickly, when you have the inflammatory disease of atherosclerosis, whether it's from Coca-Cola and French fries, or you've got an autoimmune condition or some kind of arthritic problem, which is also autoimmune, either way, when you drive inflammation in the arteries, you get little pustules, atheroma or atheromatous plaque, and you build them up all over the place. And if your blood pressure is high, it stresses the arteries, causes micro tears, and that will promote them also. But either way, if you're driving the disease, which leads to heart death and stroke death, your body at some point begins to bring in calcium to stabilize the pustules, right? So the calcium is not actually the problem. The calcium is the body trying to stabilize your problem. But if you've got a lot of calcium, it means you have a lot of problem, So that's the genius. So a calcium scan result for someone will give more predictive power of future heart attack and mortality generally than all of the risk factors the establishment uses put together. So you can use the algorithm and put in all the risk factors, and it's pretty predictive, but a single calcium scan result will trump all of that. So it's the ultimate test. And the other key thing is, if you get a high score, there's no need to panic, because the vast majority of people who have a high score, and most don't know it, they don't do anything about it. But if a low-carb person or a person who heard me speak or any of my talks, if they discover the calcium scan through me, they'll also understand that a high score is not a time to panic, because now you're empowered to stop the progression through all the methods we know. If you get a high score, and because your doctor told you to get a calcium scan, the medical machine will suck you in, stuff you with statins, and won't tell you anything useful about nutrition or root cause. So that could be a problem. But through us, if you find out about the calcium score, you also know you take your high score and you take action, and then a couple of years later, you check back. And overwhelmingly, you don't need to make the score go down. That's important. Remember, it's like scars. It's the body's repair scars. It's not a problem in itself. You need to stop it progressing rapidly. And one of my favorite studies, Raji et al., they showed that a person who had a high score, but they only for the next 6 years progressed at less than 15% per year, so say 10% a year they're going up, their risk actually was no greater than someone with a 0 score. And the people who were higher progression, they went up 20 or 25% per year, their risk was enormous. So the happy story is you just target slowing progression and your risk collapses. But if you do nothing and the progression is fast, your risk is enormous. Like a high score is 25 times the risk of a heart attack in the next 10 years of someone with a 0. Like high blood pressure, you're 2 times more likely to have a heart attack. High cholesterol, it doesn't make any difference actually. High insulin, 5 or 6 times. But a high calcium score, if you do nothing, you could be 20 times more likely to have a heart attack. That's how powerful it is.
Goodness, that's huge. But there's a strong message there of don't panic. You've got this information, and there are very positive, very proactive steps that you can take to manage your own health. And you've mentioned them, quickly in passing. Low carb. You've mentioned insulin, which I've heard you talk about as a root of chronic disease in the past. So we're mentioning these in passing. What potentially 3 actions would the best steps somebody could take for their health in that situation?
Yeah, well, I often keep it as simple as I can, for lay people. So I coined the phrase the devil's triad back over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. The devil's triad keeps it simple for people. So what is the devil's triad? That is the broad root of most modern chronic disease. Well, it's sugars, refined grains or refined carbohydrates, refined wheats, just think bread or stuff like that, and vegetable oils or seed oils, these factory produced, disgusting kind of fake oils in the sense, extracted from seeds with high temperature, pressure, hexane solvents, colored, deodorized because they're rancid muck, oxidized at one point, and then have to deodorize them because otherwise they'd stink and nature would be warning us not to eat them. I could go on. So those vegetable oils, if people Google the Hateful Eight or Kate Shanahan, doctor, they'll see the 8 terrible vegetable oils. And of course, what you need to eat is natural oils like lard, tallow, coconut oil, olive oil, anything that was just crushed or extracted from a real food. So anyway, that's the devil's triad. So at its simplest, people need to avoid the devil's triad. And it's only 3 things. Now, the tricky bit is the devil's triad makes up most ultra-processed foods. And it makes up most of what's in the supermarket. So that's the tricky bit. So you got to be a label reader for vegetable oils and wheats and refined grains and, of course, sugars. But if you go away from processed and ultra-processed foods and you move to real food, it can be as simple as that. If you only eat real food, unprocessed, except for grinding or, cooking, of course, you're pretty much there on the nutrition front. All you need to add after that is maybe some supplements, because a lot of modern foods, they don't have as many minerals and vitamins as they did because of modern intensive methods. But broadly speaking, Real Food Rocks had the eat real food message. And if people could only do that, they'd be 80% there. So that's kind of on the food and nutrition. But also exercise is still important. And in my online weight loss masterclass workshops, I go through in great detail resistance training. Very simple, 20 minutes twice a week. You get huge benefits. You don't need to run marathons, but people should at least have that 20 minutes 2 or 3 times a week of simply doing press-ups and simple body exercises. You don't need equipment, but critically doing them to failure. Sounds bad, but it just means you do your press-ups until the last one you cannot do one more. And then you've reached the signal point to create muscle in the body. And that's the magic point. And if you do that with a bunch of exercises, go to failure. There's no risk because it's only your own body weight. No problems, no risks. You will begin to build muscle, and it will have enormous benefits for glucose and insulin management in your body, along with the diet. And then let me see, myself and Dr. Gerber, my co-author, we had the kind of the top 10, but also we have sun, so healthy sun exposure, or even lamps, if you can't get the sun in your area, but never burn. So as I get as much sun as I can ever get physically, and I also have big lamp systems, but I never burn. And that is the healthiest state a human can achieve in terms of light, is as much sun as you can get without burning. And that's why a Swedish study back in 2013, when I started on this, they looked at a cancer study, but then they changed it to all-cause mortality because they got a shock. They were looking for more sun exposure driving cancer death. And then they discovered it was actually the opposite. And then they discovered it wasn't just cancer. And basically, they had a famous graph that showed you had double the chance of dying even when corrected for all other sociological or other aspects between the people in the study, you double the chance of dying if you got less sun exposure. And they basically said that lack of sun exposure or lower sun exposure is a risk factor for all-cause mortality. So this is a truth that may surprise people, you know, but burning the skin, unsurprisingly, repeated burning, damages the DNA, damages cellular, and that's a different matter.
I find the sun topic, the light, really fascinating. That hasn't been picked up by many. That it does seem to make such a significant difference. There's a number of different. I was just reading one the other day, really interesting, showing differentiation even in country, England, across England, north to south, showing that there's difference in health outcomes and risk level just because the south of England is more sunny and those living in the north have less sun exposure. So that is a missing piece of the puzzle, but which I think is wonderful. I think, I want to dive much more into that as a topic, but that's a lot that you've covered. It gives people, I feel, really, really good crucial steps that's going to potentially get them to the place that you were, high risk level, and then actions to be able to turn that around. It's not easy. I think some personality types go all in quite quickly and others need a lot more scaffolding, a supportive community, it broken down into the steps. I would say nutrition first, and for some people I work with, that means starting with breakfast first, or starting with the sugary drinks and then moving on to another one once you've bedded that in. But you did make a comment there that the food you're switching to, real foods, quite simple. I mean that, for someone it could just be a piece of meat. For an evening meal, it can be that simple. But real food, but that is hard in our society. If you're eating in the office, anything at the buffet, if you're eating anything from the breakfast aisle at the supermarket, if you're eating in a restaurant, it's going to be cooked in seed oils often, although things are changing, very interestingly. But yeah, it's tough. So there's work to be done. And when you were saying most of the supermarket, you weren't kidding. It is the majority of the supermarket is made up of foods that are going to make you metabolically unwell and increase that risk, as you said. I think it's worth, because you just touched on your group, your nutrition group, your health group, and the support that you've been giving people. If you could share a little bit more about that and how, normally I ask at the end, but because we've touched on it, I think it's really important that people know that there are options for them and support for them if this is something that they want to get involved in. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, Claire. Well, it was a couple of months ago, and again, this discussion may release much later, but I plan on doing this long term. So I invested in a new studio and a 75-inch touchscreen and all the equipment to do proper kind of interactive workshops. And I just made the website ivorcumminsworkshops.com, all one word. And so far I have 3. The first one is resilience and mental strength, which I think is very important in the modern world. I'm inundated with people who have stress, etc., from the way the world is and other things, or having obesity or having health risk. I do critical thinking, which is crucial because you need to be able to assess everything we're told in the media. We know now we've been lied to for 50 years. So how people can actually deploy the skills that, say, myself as a 30-year complex problem solver can just easily deploy. But for lay people to really have more ability to do that, and the chaff from the wheat, if you will. But the other one is the weight loss masterclass. And there I have a model which I'm developing, which is nutrition, which is crucial. And it is the first section, as you said, Claire. Then there's psychology, which you also mentioned, which is crucial. So I do a big chunk on psychology and mind management. That's a big part of weight loss. And people often underscore it. And then practices is the third section, all of the key practices, because practices turned into habit become success. And the last one is planning and just preparedness, which is shorter, but just important. But I think the key thing for me is psychology is a huge part of it, beyond the nutrition, because the reason you don't successfully go to real food, the reason you fail, the reason you reach out in your corporate for a croissant when you know you oughtn't, but your chimp brain tells you, look, it'll be fine. All of that is psychology. And because I give a 3-hour full workshop on mental strength and cognitive behavioral psychology and science, I'm able to take the key bits of that into the weight loss masterclass. So I think that's the missing piece often. I think that's what's important about our workshop.
And people can look at your book as well that came out a number of years ago. You've got a lot of online material as well. But I again and again see that people do need this community around them, support and opportunities for that interaction where they can ask personal questions and even just basic obstacles that they're facing that week, or with, if they haven't got that support in the house, or with a particular occasion that's coming up. And then some people with their own health have more complicated issues, so the weight doesn't fall off as readily for some as others, and they've got plateaus or they've got other issues. And as you say, again, Ivor, mindset. You're unpicking decades and decades of conditioning from the policymakers, the peak health bodies, everyone around you medically, potentially, your workplace, your family traditions, and all of your society's occasions. Yeah. So, it's actually the biggest wonder is how some people just march straight in and make the changes, not why people struggle, really.
Yeah. And, that's the thing. I have a segment in the psychology and also in practices, exactly that, about joining with groups, because we're troop animals, not so much herd, we're that as well. But if people want to pick up The Chimp Paradox, a book on how our brains work, it's fantastic. Professor Steve Peters. Basically, we have two thinking machines in our head, our whole lives, separate thinking machines. We have the limbic system, which is our chimp brain, which for the first two or 3 years of life, that's why babies screech and they can't do logic and they can't plan and they can't do anything. They only have their inherited chimp brain. And then our prefrontal cortex develops. And that's got compassion. It's got a sense of time and planning. It's got problem solving. It is who we are, our prefrontal cortex. But the problem is the chimp brain screams for the donut. The chimp brain does the road rage. We need to learn to manage our chimp brain. But joining a troop, if you will, like you mentioned, I advise like Vinnie Torturich, no sugar, no grains, or there's another one, type 1 grit for type 1 diabetics. But to be quite honest, it's a great community, even if you don't have a type 1 child. But by joining a troop, you get other chimps in your new network who support you and are doing what you're doing, switching to real food. But absolutely, I give the examples. You go in, sometimes your family will literally resent you. You lose weight, you're eating healthy. Humans often resent that because they want everyone to be like them. And then they think it's a conspiracy theory. They are eating keto. That's a conspiracy theory because they've been indoctrinated by the mass media nonsense. So they'll attack you. And like, it's astonishing, but people are great. Don't get me wrong, but people drag you down and other people lift you up. So you must find a troop like your groups or like any group that has the science right and is interested in moving us all forward together to better things. But by God, people can get dragged down by the uninitiated or the indoctrinated. And we've all seen terrible examples of it.
That's true, and now influencers and being influenced as well by the wrong information coming out of really, really what are considered trusted institutions, which is a big topic that you often unravel for us. But just before we go there, I just wanted to go back to a comment you made earlier on the heart health, getting your markers, potentially if you got access to it, getting a coronary score test result, and then being sucked in to the medical establishment route pathway of treatment. And you mentioned statins. What are your thoughts on is there a time and place for statins? Because a lot of, the medical establishments have wholeheartedly got behind them and prescribed liberally, very, very liberally. And then a lot of people have been questioning that, medical people, professionals, researchers, showing that it's not as black and white. So I think some people are caught in between. So when do they have a purpose, for example?
Yeah, well, it's a tricky one. So I try and simplify it for people as an engineer. You got to be careful advising against medications. You're technically not a doctor, whatever. But the British Medical Journal, 2016, I always direct people to this. A team for the first time said, look, what life extension, because that's all that really matters, is how many more days you live. What life extension on average from the pharmaceutical trials themselves, right, do you get from several years or up to 5 years taking daily a statin? Because it's got side effects. 20% plus approximately will get some degree of side effect, and a smaller percentage than 20, it'll be very severe and life limiting. So that's a big deal. So what do you get? And what they found by using a graphical method from a whole load of statin trials, now they could be biased, those trials, to favor the drug because they're run by pharma and they take out people who respond badly in advance. So they jig the scales. But even taking their data, which is the best possible outcome you could look at, 3 to 4 days of extra life on average for several years taking a drug with loads of side effects. That's over. So any engineer or any normal person with logical faculties using their prefrontal cortex and not getting scared with their chimp brain, getting scared and eating any drug they give you because you're scared of a heart attack, this is what happens. But if you use your prefrontal, which has logic capability, 3 extra days statistically for many years taking a drug daily that has loads of side effects, that's insane. I mean, honestly, that is insane. Now, it was 3.2 days for people who already had a heart attack. So that's called secondary prevention. And I used to always say, look, if you've had a heart attack, the data is much stronger of benefit. But to be honest, when this paper came out, you get 3.2 days, 4.2 days. It's noise. So you can say a lot more on statins, and there's loads of books on it. And Malcolm Kendrick, doctor in the UK, is fantastic work, and loads of people have done books. But that's kind of the bottom line. And the last thing, Claire, sorry, I won't go on about it, but you might say, yeah, but were they correct, that team? Well, they used such a simple, basic graphical model, they couldn't really go wrong. So the bad guys use complex mathematical models, like think Neil Ferguson in 2020 of Imperial College, right? And that's what you do to lie. It's always the same. You use complex models and obscure models and modeling if you're lying, right? But if you use a simple graphical model that's straightforward, you get to a simple truth. And the industry went crazy when this paper came out, peer-reviewed, British Medical Journal, and they began to complain, obviously. Because otherwise, if people knew about this, they'd never take statins. And they attacked and they wanted it retracted. And guess what, Claire? It's still online to this day. Never retracted because it wasn't incorrect. It was just the answer was not what industry wanted. So they have vast legions of medical doctors, smart people who are literally in a mass formation. It's literally a kind of almost like a psychosis. They've been indoctrinated for so long that A, statins are wonder drugs and save lives like nothing else, and B, anyone who says otherwise is a conspiracy theorist nut job. So A, B, they've got for nearly a half century. So all of them now are useful idiots who just couldn't contemplate that whole thing is largely nonsense. I mean, there's some benefits for some people, they affect inflammation, they have some benefits, but the whole thing is a farce as far as I can see, Claire.
And like you say, it's a big topic, but you've given people pointers if it's something that they want to dive into the work further and read the research that you're pointing to, like the facts are there, black and white. So yeah, and some people are very, very interested in that topic. But actually, you know, as I've said, heart disease, it's the biggest killer in the US. It's an enormous fear of people, for good reasons. So people are very, very fearful, and then they're potentially taking a medication that they're not comfortable with rough side effects. So it's a huge talking point. But are you talking as well about, I find it really interesting that how people are supposed to pull all of this information apart when they've got busy lives. They're not from potentially an engineering or kind of complex problem solving background or science or medical background. So they're presented this information by their trusted sources. The biggest universities in America, the peak health bodies, and our medical institutions and our hospitals and our hospital research departments, and that's also been problematic, as we've seen potentially with the seed oils and the processed foods getting very, very slow to accept, despite growing information and data coming out on ultra processed foods and all of the harms. They're very, very slow to make changes. In fact, you know, on the information being put out by bodies is still extremely problematic. But the Make America Healthy Again a movement, I just wanted to get your thoughts. I'd love to pick your brains and get your thinking. Are we on the right track with that? What's good about it? What progress do you think they're going to make?
Yeah, look, it's a positive sign, Claire, but I mean, I'm a corporate guy, and one of the reasons I was successful in all this health stuff, and since 2020 on the pandemic thing, was I'm just highly versed in corporate politics and all the shenanigans, which is kind of an advantage, I must say, because lay people who don't have that experience, it's much harder to learn. But I have a careful eye on it. I have some concerns. I'll wait and see what happens. RFK has obviously done fantastic work on many health issues, including the mass medication of children kind of topic. We won't even mention the name. You're not allowed to even say the V name. But there's some slightly concerning signs, like he has rolled back on his, with the COVID V. He seems to be doing nothing when he was quite outspoken beforehand, and it's still on the childhood schedule in the USA, which is just nuts. He's come out with some very strong political kind of statements, which are very surprising. I won't even get into what they are. There was a huge fuss around colorings and additives in food, and I was worried, like, that's a bit of a distraction, right? Because we didn't mention additives and colorings because that's way down the Pareto list. I mean, the big thing with food is what we talked about today. But they were going on and on about additives and stuff. And I'm saying, why are they going down that avenue? And
almost
there's
like
some
a
other
false
things.
flag.
Kind of, it's like, you know, it's giving lip service to taking action. If you just pick some BS that industry and pharma don't care about. On the other hand, he says by September, they're going to come out on the autism question and it's going to be answered. And I put out on Twitter, I said, do you reckon they'll actually get the answer, or it'll just be a whitewash job, you know, and a whole load of connected people will be involved in the research and they'll find that it's fluoride. So, the fluoride's been taken out now anyway in America. So, you know, it's fluoride. I don't know. I'm cynical.
It's intriguing. But, I think being cynical is a good position, because my concern with this movement, I'm just butting in, is that people seem to be all wholly behind it. So any move is a good move. And that's, I think, a bit of healthy cynicism. So we can keep nudging the progress in the right direction is really important. We should be cynical on all sides, but can't just get swept away with and accept anything.
Well, exactly. So let's say our side of the house broadly on nutrition or pandemics or whatever, say you and me and all the other people who want change in a positive way, and they're quite informed. if we find that we're arguing amongst each other with the policies that do roll out, right, there's a major problem. Because if there's infighting and we've been given heroes that are going to save us, and next minute they're doing stuff, some of which is kind of odd or off color, and we begin to argue amongst ourselves if they are saviors or not, you can kind of assume they're not. Because genuine people will listen to the masses, will listen to the people. And like RFK has been on the ball so far in nearly everything. If he begins to be off the ball, just when he gets into power and gets all the support, it's concerning. So it's not being just overly cynical. It's being critical thinking, appropriately cynical, and judge them by their actions. And if they start doing actions that are out of sync, well, one or two are okay because no one's perfect. And if, for instance, RFK, I think he does actually believe some of the climate stuff. So you can say, well, okay, he's just misinformed. But if they start doing a whole bunch of things like not addressing the big things and addressing little things, or coming out with surprising comments in support of political ideologies that are not in sync with what decent people might support, yeah, just keep watching.
Yeah, keep watching. And I think it's an incredible statement that they're going to discover the root of autism, and they've got a date for that discovery. That's incredible. That's going to be one to watch.
Yeah, not to butt in, but that just occurred to me yesterday. I was talking, I think, to my wife. That is so huge, that topic. And I have my own thoughts on it, and I won't say them here, but I can tell you there's a couple of the very top people in low carb, doctor, professor level. I have a cluster of 5, 6, 7, 8 people who over 10 years I have verified to be almost never wrong on anything, because they're just the top, the pinnacle. They're like the ultimate golfers, if you will. You know, they're just those people have thoughts on the autism. And I won't get into it here because you're not meant to question the V's. But let's just say I have my thoughts on that one. And my problem is it's too big to fail. So let's say the V's were connected or connected to a chunk of it, right? That's too big to fail. That cannot be allowed to be known. You know where it would go if that became known. If that was true and it became known, it's too big to fail, Claire. I don't know what you think, but I'm looking at that one and saying crazy stuff will happen before that would be allowed to be known, because it could collapse the wave function of the magic V's that every baby has to get 50 of them by the time they're a few months old or whatever. I don't know the numbers. That whole thing is so big. It's so big. What do you think? It's too big to fail. I worry it's too big to fail. It cannot be allowed to fail.
It's fascinating that the announcement is out, and then interesting that we have financial backers who are significant in that movement who would be of the same opinion there as you, which is, I mean, from my point of view, just to add some nuance, I'd say that there's additional factors as well. And I'm saying metabolic health and insulin resistance as a component. I don't, and I wouldn't know, what a percentage, but in my opinion, it's a contributing percentage, but I don't know, 50 V's in childhood. America by far leading the world there. It's crazy. And in terms of coming out and accepting responsibility then that's just one area of health and life and neurocognitive function. So yeah, enormous, gigantic. So I'm intrigued. A good thing that attention is back on those core topics. But we've not even managed to shift other juggernauts around like low carb for obesity or reducing carb intake for diabetes management. If you could, so we've not turned the low hanging fruit's not been picked. So I can't see changing anything radical as what is being discussed. But fascinating. So does get me wanting to ask you what 3 things, if you were advising that movement, you were the government policy advisor and you had their ear, these 3 things, these either three actions, or what would you want to be saying to them to be working on? I think I know one of them, at least.
Well, yeah. What would you tell the? Well, you'd keep it simple.
You have the power.
Yeah, I would say, well, remember how we were all thrown into the cauldron and chronic disease exploded? It was done with simple, untrue things and simple images like the food pyramid. So that was enormously successful to get people to stick their nose in the bread trough and the pasta trough. It worked. So I'd say you need simple things. And one great thing would be a correct food pyramid. And interestingly, Nina Teicholz and Tro Kal and a whole bunch of my best buddies from the old low-carb days have produced a paper for people who have diabetic type issues, which is basically the majority of Americans over 45 now, and who are the people who will have health problems. So they're the people you want to be careful to help them with diet. They've done a new pyramid, and I'm sure you'll be delighted. You may have seen it. I featured it at the weekend at our online conference, or our real life conference actually in Ireland. Food pyramid, and what's down the bottom? Meat, fish and eggs and real food. And then there's vegetables that are low carbohydrate, low starch. And then you go up to the top and oils and all these things sparingly. So they've got a real pyramid and it's peer reviewed. So we have made progress. That would never have gotten peer reviewed and published in a significant journal even 5 years ago. So there is an element of turning. So I'd say, keep it simple. We need a real food pyramid. And that's the central thing for health in America. That's the big thing. It's not the colorings. We're not talking about colorings on our pyramid or additives. We don't really care. We're saying you eat real food, you'll reverse diabetes, you'll collapse your long-term chronic disease risk, you will completely change America's face. I was talking to Dr. Ron Rosedale in April 2020 at the start of the pandemic, and basically we agreed if there were only meat, fish and eggs and such available magically in America, there was tons of them, but they were just meat, fish and eggs and stuff, and maybe you had salt and seasonings. That's all you had. Within a couple of months, the population would visibly start transforming. This is a fact, right? Within a few months, half the pharma companies would collapse because hypertension would collapse. You know, the cholesterol nonsense would begin to collapse. I mean, it would be shocking within months. And he made the point, he said, yes, and Ivor, within a day, blood markers across the country would be changing markedly towards the better. And I said, actually, you're right. Within a day, insulin would be dropping, literally, and glucose would be heading down. Within a week, blood panels all across America, if that happened, what I said, blood panels all across America would be collapsing in combined algorithmic heart risk. And Tro Kal did a study with corporate people, didn't calorie control. They just got a whole bunch of people on what we're talking about, just real food. And I think it was only 3 months. They had a 48%, I think, drop in 10-year heart disease risk from the people from their blood tests. Right? This could be this simple if they only did that. And then the second thing is fix the big ones. And that one of those is what we mentioned, the autism, and not just that, but child health in general, because we've seen loads of studies where like people who don't go down the orthodox route of taking 50 shots or whatever it is, maybe it's 20, I don't know what it is, the people who happen not to, and you look at their health and you look at their children's health, it's associational, but dramatically they're better off without them. Now, why is that? Why are they universally better off without any of the magic sauce? There's got to be a reason.
Yeah.
Food for thought.
It is food. It's food for thought again, and then all the medications that we went to a recent events before our children went to camp. And it was the information night, rock up, get the info. And then they had a table for collecting the medications of children who were going on this camp. There was not that many going on the camp, maybe like up to around 20, maybe 30. This table was piled high, and it's your ADHD, it's your sleep meds, and it's all of the others. I mean, I went to a conference last year, and there was a paediatrician giving a talk, and he was mentioning case after case of children, he sees with fatty liver disease, age 6 years old, 7 years old, and it's totally preventable. Diabetes type 2, and it's all preventable. So yeah, it's really shocking the amount of medications children are on for their behaviour, so that they can fit into a system perhaps that isn't fit for them, and then sleep after that medication. It's interesting times, very interesting. So do you have hope from I know you're sceptical, which I think is healthy scepticism. It's got you to where you are with your own life, your health, your own family. So are you hopeful in part?
Yeah, I think the events since 2020 have woken up a lot of people to the reality that the system may be kind of rotten, where before they would have thought that was a conspiracy theory. So I would love if the awakening was much bigger, but it's certainly pleasing and substantial. So in 2022, and the reason I refer back to the 2020 incident is because we recognize some of the top people in low carb, and myself, but I had advantage of all the network. We realized that actually there may be no point fighting the nutrition, statin, cholesterol game if this other much bigger game is successful. We'll end up with mandatory meds of all sorts down the road, and we'll be censored for even criticizing statins. I mean, that's the way it was going. And by 22, when people all put on their little pieces of face paper and they complied, I thought, look, maybe it's give up the ghost, because this is heading straight to total control and totalitarianism of a pharma, medical, industrial complex. So I was there, I was still talking positively because I didn't want to let people down or demotivate, but I was really thinking to myself, might be time to run for the hills. This is crazy. But that changed around. And then we had the failure of the monkeypox nonsense. We largely are having the failure of the bird flu nonsense. The climate nonsense is really suffering now. You can see it a lot of places. And we have a growing number of people just realizing, actually, we've been lied to on XYZW. And actually, to be honest, probably most of the system is pushing corporate and geopolitical nonsense on us. I think it's all to play for, Claire. I always say my bottom line. We're on the razor's edge. We're heading down. We're heading to head off the bad guys at the pass. And it's all to play for on the razor's edge. And that's the way I see it. And that's the way to live. I remember we came through the ice age. I think we were down to 10,000 breeding pairs in Europe. And we are descended then from the people who got through the horrors, way bigger than today. Humans are always capable of using their prefrontal logic, problem solving, compassion, planning, always capable of overcoming anything. And now our big challenge is that most of our herd has been indoctrinated and hypnotized with propaganda for decades. But it's just another challenge. We grow the people who are rational and aware and who are no longer hypnotized by nonsense. And, we can someday reach a tipping point. All to play for. That's the way I look at it.
All to play for. Well, that's given us some thought. And I think on that note, we're coming to the end of this hour together. I'd love you to drop where people can follow you. You've mentioned how they can connect with you in terms of the nutrition work that you're doing and the support that you're offering. You can mention that again, but if they're interested and really kind of want to kind of dive into these other matters that you discuss and you research and you present and you connect with others on, where best to get hold of you and follow you?
Yeah, I'd say if you currently, until the bad guys get the upper hand. If you just search for my name, Ivor Cummins, you'll quickly get my Twitter, where I'm quite active, X, @FatEmperor. And you'll see my Facebook as well, which I think is just Ivor Cummins, and Facebook. You'll find my big account. And YouTube, Ivor Cummins Science. I think it's @Ivor Cummins Science. But again, in the search engines, if you look at my name, you'll still get my YouTube. So they're the main platforms I talk to people all and sundry on.
Thank you for this chat. Thank you for connecting again. Always fascinating to hear from you and hear what you're up to.
Thanks so much, Claire. Great work you're doing. Ditto. And we'll circle back again at some point. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe. This really helps us to be able to create more content.